To centralize power and control, or to decentralize power and control? That's the question of the day. Actually, I'm joking. It's not the question of the day. If you living in a democratic country where there's a democratic political system, like in the case of South Africa, the most ideal system is where power is decentralized to some extent, not entirely, obviously, but decentralized is sort of the route we should be moving towards, as opposed to a centralized route. And from my observation, I can see that our head of state has been keep putting his signature to good use quite a lot. He has been signing a lot of things in the recent times. I'd say in the last year or two, there's just been an announcement after an announcement of things that are being signed into law, obviously using his power as the head of state. And I just wanted us to look at why centralization can become a problem in a democratic country, or a country which has a democratic system. And obviously, democratic system means that, one, people value being individuals. We are not a collectivist kind of society where we think alike. We value the fact that we are individuals. We value the fact that we are different. And we also value freedom. Another important thing about democracy, which we fought very hard for, we have it now, and we are all recognized, obviously, as equal before the Constitution, or at least the law that guides South Africa. But just as you move down from the Constitution, then the Constitution makes provisions for, like I said, the diversity that South Africa is, or the South African society is. So why are these laws almost giving an idea, or giving some vibes of government trying to centralize and essentially increase its control and its power? I think a good way to set the tone for this particular video is a clip that I saw on Twitter. It's a resurfaced clip of Julius Malema when he visited, or he was at the Cape Talk radio station speaking to Lester Kiewit. And this was in March of 2024, so it's a resurfaced clip. It's not a new clip. And Penwell, the Black Pen, essentially brought this clip forward because I'm not sure why in particular this was of interest to him. But anyway, he made a tweet about it, speaking about this clip where Malema was explaining his position around nationalization. And Penwell the Pen, let me actually find the tweet. I had it open. Find the tweet. So yeah, let me just roll the clip, and then I'll get back with giving a bit of an explanation.
With nationalization, it doesn't mean we're going to take a big construction company and make it a state construction company. No. Nationalization, we mean establishment of a state housing construction company, state road construction company, and there could be a private-owned construction companies, but the state must have its own internal capacity to do its own things. And that's what we're saying. When we say we're going to nationalize the mines, it doesn't mean we're going to take Anglo-American mine. It doesn't mean we're going to take Impala Platinum mine. It simply means the state must own a mining company that will be given preference, especially on profitable minerals. The same goes with the banks. We're saying we establish a state-owned bank. That's what nationalization of the EFF means, because nationalization simply means state ownership. And we are going to establish our own bank, and then the rest of other banks must compete. This is not a threat to the banks. Look at private schools. The private schools are there and public schools are there. The establishment of public schools did not lead to the closure of private schools. The establishment of state-owned hospitals never led to the closure of private hospitals. If anything, the private hospitals are thriving more than the state-owned hospitals. So why, when it comes to the banking sector or insurance sector, the financial sector, people say, no, you can't interfere there?
So what Penwell the Pen essentially was asking, in the caption to this video, He obviously spoke about this and that. And then he says here that I understand nationalization as being opposed to privatization to mean that government would take a 50% plus stake in all big existing businesses in key strategic sectors as to benefit the people. I was wrong. Yeah, ne? Penal is on the ball. He's absolutely correct that nationalization, especially if you look at nationalization from the ideological position of the EFF, does mean exactly what Penal is saying. The definition verbatim, to read verbatim here, is nationalization is a process of a government taking over a business or industry that was previously owned by private citizens. The government then takes control of the business's operations and ownership. It's always interesting why there's always like some gray, fickle, bambiayega kind of attitude, because I mean, in other areas, Malema and co, and a lot of other people who approach politics from his standpoint do not shy away from where they stand when it comes to the centralization, decentralization conversation. But here he kind of downplayed what nationalization actually means, and I think sometimes if it's downplayed, there's probably a reason. I didn't actually watch the full interview with Lester Kivitt. I will link the video, the clip to that full interview, but it's clear he does the exact same dancing around when he's asked about open borders, because I think to some extent he understands where the concerns are coming from, and the concerns about nationalization is pretty clear, especially from my point of view. Centralization, taking control of of means of production and giving all of that to the state, has not led to positive results in other countries. Take the Soviet Union, for example. The Soviet Union, I think this was in the 1970s leading up to 1990, when eventually the Soviet Union fell. They ran an economy which they call a command economy, which is essentially copy and paste of the proposal that the EFF is putting forward, which means that government owns means of production. They sent basically nationalization of all of these key areas, mining, agriculture. And what happened in the case of Soviet Union is that whilst they had focused on certain areas, for example, they focused on agriculture mainly, they kind of neglected other areas like consumer goods and essentially things that are important to keep your nation fed and make sure that people are able to eat. Because now that you've removed privatization, people are now dependent fully on the government to provide for them. And when that area was kind of neglected, it led to starvation, it led to a lot of issues, and essentially the fall of the Soviet Union mission and that command economy that they ran at that time. And that is essentially what the EFF is proposing should happen in South Africa. Very, very alarming. And again, back to my introduction, as citizens, we need to arm ourselves with the information. We need to know the difference, because it starts very gradual. It starts with something small, and we're moving more towards centralization. What happens to our individual pursuits? What happens to our individual interests? What happens to our freedoms? Because eventually, in the case of Soviet Union, which is an example of what would happen if the EFF got its way, is that they end up having to become an authoritarian state. That's what happens. Julius Malema will always dance around this. He will always find ways to deny, make it seem like, no, that's not his approach. He wouldn't have a choice but to be authoritarian. If you are trying to shove down a system that means that we all have to lower our standards, a system that does not recognize hard work, a system that does not reward hard work, and we all basically put in that one level, eventually you're going to have to force people into that system. Because when I look at South Africans and how things are going, I think we very much enjoy having to work hard, get our benefits. We definitely enjoy that kind of lifestyle. So if anyone comes with something counter, the only way that they would be able to go about it would be to force it down our throats. I don't see how we would willingly get into a system that says it's just all the same. The reward is the same. That's just my perspective. Now, just to circle back to the initial point around democratic governments and why centralization or moving towards centralization for democratic governments just always fails, right? Governments can come up with a lot of initiatives, they can try different programs. And in South Africa, I mean, there's so many you can think of that have failed, right? And there's a very simple reason why. In fact, if you ask me, just from obviously what I have been looking at in terms of just these different systems, my ideal government is, especially in a democratic country, is a government that I think should be one small, but also a government that will act as a steward in our society. Basically, the middleman, making sure that everyone plays fair, that everyone is recognized under the rule of law, making sure that no one is left behind, so to say, because obviously taxes is still something that I believe in. Taxes, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but it has to be a fair tax system, and then that can obviously trickle down into assisting people who cannot, participate and have a role. So it's a small sort of government without necessarily having autonomy over everything. That is my ideal vision of a government in a democratic country. And it's also an ideal sort of government if you look at what research that has been conducted, because there's a lot of research that has been conducted into these systems. In fact, there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing. Even what we see, the theatrics that we see in this country, it's nothing new. So with that said, whenever government seeks to centralize more and move more in towards having stronger control, as opposed to having decentralized systems where certain things are done at a local level, where it's, our individualism is recognized, as opposed to just this iron fist control coming down, where private sector is given a hand. Not necessarily saying all must be private, but private sector is given a hand. If we move away from that system and more towards the opposite, which is centralization, what we are seeing, and many people might not be able to recognize, that why do government initiatives fail? When it's government, it's almost like no one wants it. I often say this to my friends, that there's not a single person who is proud of a government entity. I mean, it's here and there. I mean, there are some good people, I agree, in the state. But like government, it's like everyone else just wants to go to the non-government areas. If it's a government area, suddenly it's just not the same energy, it's not the same vibe. And there's a reason for that. So the very first reason why governments fail whenever they try to become the private sector, and they do it themselves, is increased bureaucracy. Democratic governments come with just a lot of bureaucracy. Like I said, democratically elected, or democratic government means you're democratically elected, meaning you're not just serving one subset of society, you're serving society with a lot of differences, vastness, diversity. And so it is the case in government structures. If you look at the fact that there's parliament, there's there's other committees within parliament, and then you get to the National Assembly, the committees within National Assembly, there's political parties, they also act as official entities, they also have their own influence. Political parties sometimes are paired with unions, worker unions, teacher unions, and so it goes. A lot of cooks in the kitchen, which essentially means that if you have to take a decision, let's say your decision is, tomorrow we are opening up a new bridge, I'm just going to help citizens move from one side of the town to the other side of the town. To get there is a long mission. Imagine if you have to decide who to hire to build a bridge. Do you tender the process out? That tender process, what does it entail? Do you still prioritize issues of BE? Is that important for you? Because now you've got one guy saying BE, the other guy saying no, let's get someone who's done it before. Do you make it, is that an internal thing? Is that an external thing? Just imagine that decision process. And as citizens, you just wonder sometimes why. You can see they were trying to build something here, and then it's like they just got tired or just stopped along the way. That is one of the reasons why. Because if you get private sector to do it, or you get someone who is not government, essentially, which would be private sector. Let's make it clear. If you get a private sector entity, anyone in private, to do it, one, they're profit driven. So they value the fact that in order for me to make the money that I need for this contract, the sooner I can get it done, the better. And that's what happens. They get it done. And they get it done well, because now not only do they want to make the buck for that particular contract, but they want to be able to be on call for when you have another project. So they also want to impress. That's another big difference. Again, I speak about majority rules as another second reason. The fact that a lot of democratic governments populism becomes another challenge, right? You want to make a popular decision, because if you make an unpopular decision and you piss off your voter base, there goes your majority. Next elections, things will not go so well for you. So popularism and being the popular guy does not always match to business objectives. For example, if you're running a business and you know that your business is maybe making jewelry or whatever, you want your business to succeed, meaning you prioritize that, even if it means you have to get people out the way, even if you have to fire people, if you have to get a new designer or whatever. So you're willing to hurt feelings along the way. You're willing to make tough decisions in order for you to get to where you need to go, even if it means being unpopular. If you are, in the case of, for example, a democratically elected party or government, you want to make everyone happy. You want to please your voter base, which sometimes means trying to please your voter base could result in you not making the most financially savvy decisions. Another reason why these things fail. They come up with them all the time and they continue to fail. Another thing, inefficiency, right? Not being profit driven can be a disadvantage. One would say, yeah, let's not put money in the front. Let's put people's lives. Sweet, that's a noble cause. Good for you. However, if you do not have profit, or at least an incentive, like for example, making a profit, what do you think you're going to do it? Well, it doesn't happen. Like, I think 2 years ago, I went to a transport department office, and I was shocked. And this is in Gauteng, which is supposed to be like the economic hub. That office did not have proper chairs for people to sit on. I just went there to do what I needed to do. I think it was related to my disc. I went to do what I needed to do, and I was out of there as soon as possible. But it happens. They're not profit driven. They do not care if I go to Google and tell them I was not happy with their service, because what is their goal? They're owned by government. What's the objective? And that can lead to efficiency. Not being profit driven can lead to inefficiency, because what's my incentive? As long as I woke up and I went to the office, who cares? I'm not trying to raise my hand up and make complaints about how the clients who come into the office don't have chairs to sit on, proper chairs to sit on. It doesn't really matter. So that's another reason. And one that we get to hear about a lot in South Africa is political will. They'll say, no, there isn't a political will for a decision to be passed or for something to be done. You hear maybe an engineer, like for example, when we had load shedding and when it was severe, you hear someone who works in the energy space saying, no, we really, really want to move forward with this, but there isn't a political will. Another reason why government initiatives fail. And I think to bring it home and make a very practical example, we have a serious crime issue in South Africa. And I try my best to make it a fact, to make noise about it. The fact that crime is out of hand. We need to get a good grip on crime as soon as possible in South Africa, especially if we really want to attract investment, if you want to keep the investment that we have, right? And if you look at centralization over decentralization, I think crime would be much better handled if we decentralize certain areas of, for example, the police service system. And the reason why I say this is because the different locations, if you look at the epicenters of, for example, murder, the most serious type of crime that is recognized in our law system, and if you look at some of the epicenters where this occurs, you would need a totally different approach. We saw this a lot with KZN, for example, where I think it is Mkhwanazi is the commissioner of KZN. He was coming with a totally different approach. And it was pretty clear from a federal or national level that approach that he was applying in KZN just wasn't quite ideal. You could tell there was pushback. You could tell there was a bit of tension that was coming up. And he was coming with an approach which I'm not necessarily saying I agree or not, but he was just saying, you know what, I know who the culprits are. I've done my intelligence. I know where to find these people. I'm going to get there. And if there's a back and forth, well, chili, chili, bang, bang. Pow, pow, pow. You give, I give. And that's essentially what his team did. They would go into these places, they would raid these houses, find all of these people that are accused and have history doing this and that, and that's how they dealt with it. It made news all over the place. But you could just see that if there was decentralization, there would be a totally different approach to how you handle crime in a KZN versus how you handle crime in an Eastern Cape, or how you handle crime in Gauteng. Because in KZN, it's almost clear that it's a lot of like the murder for hire people who KZN is home for most of them, so they basically come in and out, and their operation is totally different. They're extremely violent. There's a lot of guns. So I mean, you'd need a totally different approach, as opposed to saying, okay, national says, therefore we trickle down. You would want decentralization where that province or that local community can handle things differently. I was looking at a clip of the mayor of Umgeni the other day, and he was speaking about how some of the things that they are doing, whichever powers that they do have as a local government, is to instill streetlights to make sure that the area is well lit. Because one of the things that they have is petty crime, mamapar, the guys who just come and steal a phone and all of that, the ones that are not as harmful or as violent as what you would find in a Durban or a KZN. And all they needed was just lights, right? They needed to make sure that at night the places were lit, it's clear, and essentially that creates, or at least that takes away that like mask that Isgebengu would then rely on. If it's dark, then they can sneak up on you. And all of these things just essentially spell that if there is more power that is given to local entities, provincial, local governments, they know their local communities much better. And I think it would be a much different situation. Western Cape is another example of just how it would be a different management of the system, the hiring, the firing process, how many people you hire, the people you get on the ground, your proactive initiatives, right? Do you have a police van in every traffic light? Like in the case of Gauteng, I know hijacking is really, really high, and it's quite a problem in Gauteng versus other provinces. For example, in Limpopo, maybe they don't have as many hijackings that are happening. Our approach would need a cop at every traffic sign. That is important because, one, you're dealing with the problem in a timeless manner. You're not waiting for national to approve. You're dealing with it in a timeless manner, and I think it would make a big difference, putting the people who live in those areas much more at ease. And that is just one example about where the problem comes in when government wants to centralize and hold on and fist control over everything. Essentially, somehow, someone is getting a short end of the stick. And like I said, democratically chosen elected governments, sometimes all they just serve is their voter base. They only care about people who vote for them, people who keep them in power, and everyone else just kind of gets left behind. But now again, everyone else pays tax. So it does become a bit of an unfair system. So I've just been observing all of these bills that are being signed into law, and I thought I would just kind of throw this out there and say, fine, whatever, let government continue. They have the power to do so and act the way that they do, but we also just need to be armed with information and understand before we just sit back and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's fine. I really was inspired by the pushback for things like e-tolls, for example, because people saw right through what that meant. They knew it meant they have to pay more money, they're going to be charged more taxes, and the story didn't land. It just didn't land, and there was a strong pushback, and that's what we need to become. We need to become a society that pushes back when it's just a bit too much. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed already, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.